Hello, welcome. My name is Dr. Paulina Guzzardo, and I'm here today to talk to you about youth success amongst broken systems. A little bit about myself. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I recently received my PhD from Texas Wesleyan in family therapy. Some of my research and interests have been with at-risk youth and their systems, and some of my research that we'll be talking about tonight as well has inspired me to create working systems where there aren't any, or where there are lacking pieces and parts in organization. So some of my work has been with foster kids and their systems, and I know we'll be touching on grandparents raising grandchildren, and surprisingly, there's a lot of that in the foster system as well. I will be working for a nonprofit agency soon. My passion is to create access for everyone. And I've done some training in schools as well, in helping teachers and personnel work together and create what we'll talk about more in this live chat, but successful triangles and systems that allow for youth to be most successful. And some of my personal experience, we'll be touching on divorce as well, and how that system can also be strengthened to make sure that we have youth that are successful and growing up, learning and developing as they're supposed to. My family also had divorces, and I myself have been divorced almost 2 years. So there's a lot of things that personally I know work, and what's been really great is to see how that difference is in practice as well and personally. When we apply a model, a family therapy model to broken systems, which we'll get into more as well. So some of the topics that we'll cover this evening are what is called the structural family therapy model. And basically, it's a model that reorganizes systems to function at their optimal level. And that's meaning all parts of the system. So not just a troubled youth, but also their caretakers, their siblings, the people that are having relationships around the troubled youth and with the troubled youth. Because in this segment this evening, we'll be focusing on patterns and the kinds that can really add to youth being unsuccessful, and patterns that can really add to youth thriving. So we will be applying that model to divorce, to grandchildren, what I have, grands raising grands, and kinship care. And we'll be talking a little bit about modeling solution-focused mentality and reinforcing successful outcomes. And that's really what this discussion will be about. And the patterns that we'll talk about, we can see in nature, we can see in the way we construct things. The number 3 is a very powerful number, and the triangle is a very strong, we cut out for a moment, a very strong shape, as you'll get to see in our discussion. Please feel free to type in questions or thoughts, depending on how the flow of this chat goes. I will probably answer those at the end, unless it's a question that's, will get us to a better understanding right in the moment. So I'm just going to briefly tell you about this structural family therapy. It's a model. It's one that I practice. Salvador Minuchin and colleagues developed this model in the 60s, really to address youth issues, problems, and poverty, and systemic things that interfere with youth development and success. And, one of the things that this model works with well is when there is an urgency for change. It observes real real-time dysfunctional and functional patterns. And it's very powerful in that the data is grounded data. We're looking at it, we're observing it, we can identify it. And if we can do that, we can also identify our outcomes and measure them. And if we can do that, then we have a more likelihood to say that applying this model is going to help people and is going to have an overall positive systemic impact on the entire system. So these triangles that we're talking about, they're patterns that come out of conflict avoidant patterns between two people, pulling in a third. And we'll talk about that more. But and these are natural triangles. We think about a system where you have an adult dyad, where you'll have maybe where you'll have two parents, right? Or maybe you'll have a parent and a sibling, or a grandparent and a sibling, or parent. And just for the purposes of the shape, then we have the child, right? And so we're looking at three parts, and our unit of measure is going to be the system, the family unit. So we'll be talking about symptoms, but we'll also be talking about patterns and relating. So what this model does, it restructures parental and child subsystems. So we have the parental system, the child subsystem, and it defines those and restructures them. Really for the purpose of functional systemic development. The structural family therapy model has been very successful with youth issues and problems, conduct issues at school, all kinds of things, even anorexia and asthma. I've had the privilege of working with Dr. Charles Fishman, who lives in New Zealand now, and he is an expert on this model. And some of the things, he's also a child psychiatrist, an MD, and he claims that, and I concur, that this model is incredibly powerful, and he's seen changes in patients, that were close to really not making it, and he was able to reorganize the family in such a way that the outcome was life, essentially. So, as we said, structural family therapy was created by Minuchin and others, and it originated from need, troubled family dynamics in the larger system, maintaining problems. Because as we talk this evening, we're going to see more and more that we're actually building equations. We're building ways to check ourselves, to check how the system is operating. And one person can be that check light in a symptomatic way, but as well when we look at relationships and broaden the context, we will notice that there are ways to intervene really quickly and effectively where it's really needed, where we need to reshape relationships so that we have successful people, successful society. One of the things that I studied or did my research on is school refusal, which is, a youth symptom, an externalized youth symptom. And I practiced this model in that context, creating a system. A lot of times there were well-functioning system. There were a lot of single-parent families, and the teachers mimicked some of these single-parent families where there's lack of support, there's lack of supervision, there's lack of relationship because of the demands of work, the demands of money, all of those things. It's not a job for one. That's why the unit of measure is the system. And we'll talk a little more about that, how we can draw in others, how we can broaden our system if we are in that position. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a single mother, and one of the things that I've had to focus my energy on is creating a system of support in how I'm disciplining and raising my children and allocating time. So it's important. Without that, it's very easy to see how quickly things can become difficult. So let's see here. We are talking about youth development just a little bit. And, there are many things that affect youth in their development. Things like upbringing, environment, race, ethnicity, class, and social status are considered out of their control. And things like strengths, making choices, co-creating preferred identities, although a lot of times these things are also not accessible in their context. So this is why I might use some metaphors, like building or creating a dish. There is a recipe, there are ingredients, excuse me, that need to be there in order for youth to be successful. And we know that those ingredients can sometimes be lacking when we have broken systems or struggling systems. So as we talked about, this is going to be a systemic intervention. Let's see here. Got a little bit. Let's go back to youth development. So, we're talking about pre-adolescence, adolescence, typically a fragile time. We're needing more independence. We're needing different things, family support, structure, all very important things, and at a time when they can be lacking. So that can be difficult. Youth become at risk for academic failure and behavior problems when they experience trauma, violence, abuse, neglect, lack of parenting and support. So a lot of what we're also talking about here today is talking about one of the things that we can do, which is increase that support and that structure using the parts that we have. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that. There's an interesting seminal paper by Mnuchin and some colleagues. It's a 1963 paper that explores families that produce multiple acting out boys. And the authors demonstrate specific patterns that undermine parental guidance and support. Oh, something happened here. Let's see if we can get rid of this black screen. I'm sorry about that. Oh. Let's see here. Excuse me for just a moment. A little technical difficulty. Let's see here. All right, let's just keep going. I know you can still hear me. Hopefully this will go away in a moment. So anyhow, so we're talking about this pattern, and this pattern that specifically undermines parental guidance and support, which we'll be talking at great length about here, and disorganizing power dynamics between the child and parent subsystems. Now, as we talked about, that's also going to be the main intervention here, really delineating those two subsystems and strengthening them both so that they can ideally operate as one well-organized system. Let's see here. Well, a little bit of technical difficulties. Let's just keep trying. Maybe this will go away in a moment. So just a little bit about youth development. And I'm going in a specific order on purpose for those of you who've joined us or are joining in, because I want you to understand some basic tenets of the structural viewpoint that we're talking about and examining patterns. And I want you to understand youth development. As well, I want you to have a picture of divorce and then the grandparents raising grandchildren, all in a certain way, pulling it all together so that we can really understand this from a structural point of view. Let's see if I can close this out again. Goodness. No, you can't see me. I am getting some questions. I want you to know, Danielle and Karina, I am looking forward to answering your questions when we get to that point. So thank you. Please hang on with us. All right. So just a little bit about divorce. We're not going to have a large discussion of it because my point here today is not to really teach you about divorce, but to teach you about the same pattern that can very often be present in divorce, as well as grandparents raising grandchildren. So, as we know, we have a lot of marriage and divorce in our societies. About 90% of people in the Western culture will be married, and we also know that about 50% or so will be divorced, and that number climbs with subsequent marriages. So we're experiencing a lot of this. This is not new. One thing I will say, discernment counseling is a wonderful tool. Dr. Daugherty and Dr. Harris, they have a program where they study specifically the difference between people who go through their program and choose the path of divorce, how they, that they do better than people who don't discern, that might go into it, with mixed feelings. And as we know, this is definitely an area with mixed feelings. Also, some of the things here, some great tools you can get from the American Psychological Association. There's some wonderful topics on divorce and parenting. And I think we can really think about divorce. It is a very, intense thing. And I would even say we could compare it to tearing of flesh, literally. And if we think about our children, in the middle of that, they are being torn with the separation of the parents. Now, we also know that there are a lot of things that we can do during a divorce to help buffer and strengthen this tearing. So even if there are some scars, there is a good possibility for a really, high quality recovery. And I'll say that even personally, it takes a lot, but it's definitely worth it to watch your children succeed. So we're going to be talking about creating new successful ways of interacting is what we're going to be talking about regarding divorce. Really to foster youth success using hierarchy and structure while building positive relationship. So we're going to be talking about that hierarchy differential where we have the parental system and then we have the child system. Now, whether we're talking about biological parents, step-parents, grandparents, teachers, we're just putting the adults up here that are working together, and then the child subsystem. So we definitely want to do that. That's how we create the hierarchy and structure. And the positive relationship, we know research has been very clear that really what is effective first is the relationship. And we have many relationships with people and things, as we know. So relationships are important. All right. So health support for families going through a breakup. That's how I'm calling it here. So adults making sure they are taking care of themselves and or doing what they need to in order to get support. It's very important because if you're not healthy, your child is also going to struggle. Maybe, a lot more actually than the adult. Bringing people into changing context who support and encourage successful outcomes. So that is the parental role, to make sure that the parent is okay and to make sure that they have the people in their lives to help. And that all the adults are on the same page about what that means. So even if it's something to the extent of Johnny needs to, has a bedtime and is not grounded, is not allowed to play his favorite video game tonight. Well, both the person caring for Johnny physically and the parent have to follow the same rule if we're talking about a single parent or single grandparent, as is often is the case. So it's doing things on purpose and intentionally building and creating for a specific outcome. And I broadly am saying youth success, but you can call it attending school, you can call it acting at an age-appropriate level, developmental level, knowing how to interact with peers, with adults, that kind of thing, following rules. So having and or creating good boundaries with family, friends, and helpers, that's an important one because it's these boundaries that protect the structure of the system. So, parent has, a grandparent and a mother of a child might, perhaps the grandmother is overly involved in that grandchild's life, or perhaps she's telling her daughter, the child's mother, how to raise her, or is interfering with her social life or personal life or things like that. Children are watching and they're learning. We model everything for them. So it's important that we model how to say no appropriately, how to receive love, how to have boundaries and limits. We have to support the parents as well. Providing adequate support for children on purpose, as we've been talking about. Not increasing trauma, as we are seeing with our border crisis, and lack of support while families are being separated. We're really not taking care of the system. We're causing a lot of trouble there. So definitely providing it on purpose. We know what children need developmentally, and there's just no reason why that we cannot do that when we know how effective it is. So. All right, we're going to talk about a little bit about grandparents raising grandchildren, and thank you for still hanging in there with me. I do see here that some questions here from Joyce and Kristen. Thank you. You're saying that you can see me. Great, because I have this other screen here, so I'm not sure what you can see, but I'm glad you're with me, and I hope this is useful to you. So I look forward to answering your questions in about 10-15 minutes. So we're going to briefly talk about grands raising grands. Now this is a big deal. There's over 2.5 million grandparents who have responsibility for their grandchildren. There is a law that's been passed July 9th, 2018. President Trump signed into law the Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Act, and that's received support from 40 older adult and child advocacy programs and groups. So there's a lot of support for this, and the stigma needs to continue to decrease while we are generous with our resources, because it does take a community to raise a family, and we need to be mindful of that. There's a lot of resources as well for grands raising grands. So the first thing to do is really to understand that there's a lot that we can do. We don't have to feel hopeless or be unsure of what to do. Let's see here. Oh, pardon me. Let's see here. So grand families are on the rise. Some may be due to population increase of older adults, poverty, substance abuse, death of a grandchild's parent, and or extended military deployment. We need to listen to these caretakers, whether it's the grandparents or, foster parent or someone else who is in that role. It's a very important role. And we need to support caregivers in the role and support the parents of the child. Sometimes a grandparent might be having trouble with their own child, and for whatever reason, and kind of will keep that distance. And sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes terrible things happen, and we have to protect children always and provide safety. But one of the things that we also know is that we need to change the context of the system where that child lives, where that child resides, in order to reinforce youth development and success, and allow for, for growth, for healthy growth. Helpguide.org has a lot of good things too. As we said, a healthy you means healthy grandchildren. Hobbies and relaxations are not luxuries. We all need this. Our young people need to know how to relax, how to spend time, how to relate. It's okay to lean on your grandkids for help. They can do so many things, and it's great to encourage their capacity, and they will also feel helpful and good to have to be part of the solution, to be part of the family. Find someone you can talk to about what you're going through. Look for support, support groups. These things are all very important. Reach out in your community for childcare help. It's not a one person, one adult job. Definitely takes a team on the same page. Connect with parents of children. That's very helpful for parents, grandparents, any caretakers. It just helps you to not feel so alone. It allows you to be a part of the bigger picture, and validating to your experience. And for some of you who have joined us maybe midway, I just wanted to let you know I do see your questions and I will be answering them very shortly. So hang on with us if you can. Grandkids will have mixed feelings too, of course. We need to connect with the parents. We need to honor their role. And of course, safety first, but to the degree that we can. Now, I know oftentimes we'll have a situation with a caretaker who's raising a grandchild, and perhaps the parent of that parent or parents of that child don't have the best interests in mind or are making decisions that endanger that child. And so it's a sticky situation because we need to help that system, but we also need to elevate the parent to take the responsibility. It's difficult when you get to retirement age and suddenly it's time to raise kids all over again. I hear this a lot from my families that I see when I do my foster care work. And oftentimes it's single parents, single grandparents, single caretakers. So back to that triangle, we've got that structure where we have one side missing. So it's just weakened. It's like if we were building a structure and we didn't put the proper support in. It would be dangerous, and that's what this is. It's dangerous. Let's see here. Remember, children often act out in a safe place. A lot of times they have to go through a process as well. Children have a lot of nonverbal behavior. Their emotions, things come out, and it includes behavior. So that can be a sign, a good sign as well. But again, a very important time to apply the model. And we'll get into that in just a second. Some more. Let's see here. So just a little bit more. We're almost through to an ending point where we can do some questions. Thank you for your patience. I hope this has been interesting and useful to you. So what we want to do with parenting, caregiving, we want to help your grandkids learn and identify their emotions. We're teaching self-regulation. We're teaching them what to do when you're upset. We're teaching them how to handle it. We're showing them. And so it takes a deliberate, being very present in the moment and deliberately building. Young children communicate through play. It's okay to say, I don't know. Nobody knows everything. And things change over time as well. So that's why it's good to get involved with local community and support groups. Encourage contact with parents, support, honor parents' position and role with the child. And again, this at times can be complex when there's some struggle between the two adults. In the three generations that we're talking about, the trouble between the grandparent and parent. And that's where we need to apply this model as well. Because if those two adults don't get on the same page and love the child more than they hate each other or their relationship, that child will continue to fall through the crack of their misagreement or their lack of confronting the issue with that person. Let's see here. So good parenting in a fragmented system. Now they're all a little broken, even ones that, look like they're not. It's a deliberate act of making sure that those kids don't get up there in that parent's subsystem where they don't belong, or pull these parents out of this child subsystem where they also don't belong. Because that creates a lot of the problems that we're trying to avoid. So don't put your grandchild in the middle. That goes the same for child. Don't triangulate them. Go directly to the source. If you have a problem with your son or daughter, and they're the adult parent of your grandchild, and you're able to, being passive aggressive and, just doing some things, letting it leak out here and there, really leaks out on the child. Even though it's very understandable that this can be a very, very frustrating experience, to say the least, and difficult. Make parental visits part of your grandchild's routine. Again, the goal here is to build the relationships and the organization that's going to keep this family operating at its best. So if we avoid that, we continue to create layers that block those two people who need to communicate. And again, in the case of divorce and grandparents raising grandchildren, a lot of the time it's what is in the best interest of the child? What is the goal, right? We want them to go to school. We want them to be developmentally on par with their age and their peer group. We want them to thrive, to be creative, to try things. Be sensitive to your grandchild's feelings. Mixed feelings are normal. Reassurance is needed. We have to also help our grandchild deal with disappointment as adult to child, not as peer. Sometimes adults can get, because they're also going through a lot, and this is a complex situation, and there's multiple levels. It's very easy to let that frustration out on the young person, or to maybe share too much or too little. And we never want to do that. We want to be as honest as we can be, and really protect them from things that they don't need to know about. Of course, they will know if their parent is in jail, or if their parent has a substance abuse problem, or if there's any kind of violence or that kind of thing. But we, as the caretakers, as the kin, as the grandparents, can be supportive, and it can be difficult, especially when, as a grandparent, one may feel some guilt for their own parenting. And so a lot of these, although a lot of these kids are being raised by grandparents, maybe some of you, the system is there, and we can work on it so that we don't have future generations of the same thing. So let's see here. We have just a couple more minutes, and I'm going to answer some of these questions. Feel free to bring them in if you can. Okay. Let's see. We've got some hotlines and other supports. There's so here in the U.S. we have Grand Facts. It's a state fact sheet for grands raising grands in the U.S. We have Grandparents Plus in the U.K. This is advice for kinship cares. We also have the Family Court of Australia, grandparents, links, regional and national support resources. And then for Canada, we have what they call CanGrands. kinship support helpline. So there's a lot of it. And, just a couple more things about, there was a study done by Thompson and a couple other people, and he, was really examining the systemic idea of how the patterns look when children reside with the grandparent, or we have divorce at times. So there's some interesting numbers from that, but nearly 44% of the grandparents took over parenting responsibilities when their grandchild was still an infant. So, and this was a study out of 3,477 grandparents. About 1 in 10 said that they had primary responsibility for raising a grandchild for a period of 6 months or more. This oftentimes would go to 3 years. And a quarter of grands were raising grandchildren living below the poverty threshold. Just another at-risk factor. So we have to organize a systemic way to handle these problems so that we're focusing on bringing the children in to where they need to be and helping the adults organize how things are going to go. And, depending on the age of the child, there are different ways to do that. But the bottom line is the parents have to be in charge, or who's in that parental subsystem has to be in charge. And that youth has to know that, and will know that, because there's one unified message that's coming through that triangle. So now, if you're a single mom like me, or you're concerned about, well, how do I get more support? You can find another adult that supports the way you're trying to do things, and that can also join you in giving that message. It can be as simple as a friend. Mommy's friend over here, Angela, is she also thinks that it's that you've had too much candy. We're not having any more candy today. And Angela can speak from her side, supporting that, no, Mommy said no candy, so we're not doing it. And we're then creating a very strong, reinforcing way to relate. Because now that youth has to go through 2 instead of 1. Now, the adults have to get along. That's really the big secret with all of this. The adults have to find a way to get along and love that child more than they hate each other, for them to thrive. And it does transform the system. So that's just a little research. So we're just going to finish up. We're trying to balance systems. That's what we're doing, specifically in broken systems where we have divorce, where we have grandparents raising grandchildren, or kinship care. We see a lot of the same pattern as we've been talking about. And that pattern is that there's usually not enough adults, and they're usually not on the same page about how things need to go. So that is something, if you're interested in learning more about, please feel free to contact me on Kounsel Live. On Kounsel, the app, where I am. And as well, you can look me up if you want to learn more, Paulina Guzzardo at PaulinaGuzzardo.com. So it's just my name.com if you'd like to learn more information. So just to finish out here, what they referred to, that structure that I'm talking about, that pattern, they called it, Bengtson et al., 1995, called it a methodological individualism, which he refers to as single family members, typically women and or dyads, meaning 2, caregiver and care recipient. So you have that adult-child relationship. They're focused upon each other and their roles in such a way that everybody else becomes secondary in the family. So the needs of other family members are being ignored. And sometimes we can find those patterns we call enmeshed patterns. So the important thing here is to focus on relationship, reorganize dynamics so that we're looking at successful outcome for youth, and specifically name that, what it is that it will look like. Gives us a better platform than being vague or not clear, because the last thing we want is a young person in a fragmented system to not know what is expected. That's something that that lies on us. Okay, so let me take some questions. I want to make sure I have enough time for that. Thank you for hanging in here with me. I hope that it has been helpful to you. Let's see here. So I'm going to start with Karina. Karina is asking, how badly can divorce affect a kid's behavior and emotions? It's a good question. Research shows that children who go through divorce significantly have, the percentage of at-risk issues rise dramatically. But at the same time, we have research that shows that after, about a 2-year period, things can level off, and they, young people can do just as well who come from a divorce situation versus not. We also know that, we're about 75% resilient to trauma. Dr. Don Meechenbaum in Miami, Florida talks about this more, but we're built to be resistant. So as long as we look at those factors and the buffers, building those relationships, making sure we are cared for as the adult so that we can care for the young person, bringing in the significant others to help, to be that wall of that cushion, that barrier, so that that young person can thrive and not have to take any other position but the one that they're intended to take. So yes, I hope that answers your question, Karina. Let's see here. I have another question from Kounsel. Are foster parents eligible to receive any sort of financial assistance to help meet the child's needs? Yes, I know that is the case. I believe here in Texas it's about $700 per child. And that's another conversation topic perhaps, but that's part of the organization of the system. And at times you will see a parent or a foster parent with several children in the home. And if we know anything about at-risk youth, we know that putting them together in a group can make the problem even bigger. So especially when we're talking about needing more adults to get on the same page and organize. I think there should be more training for foster parents, absolutely in this, and how to create these successful triangles, these structural patterns that make a difference, that alleviate symptoms. So, and one of the examples with Dr. Fishman was, with two parents who have an anorexic young person, and the entire intervention consists of the parents getting the girl to eat a sandwich. And the whole issue was around that the mother had one opinion about the girl needing to eat or how much or whatever, and the father had a different opinion. And so this girl kept falling in that crack. And developmentally, we know she will succeed if she does what her parents say. She will survive. She will not die. Because at this point she needed to eat. It was urgent. So, but once the parents got solid on the same page, and, even the father was encouraged the mother and vice versa, once they became a powerhouse, a team, and again, this does not have to be biological parents. This can be a single parent with a good friend or a family member or neighbor, coaches. I will do that a lot in schools. I'll go into schools, and when I'm working with young people, I find the teachers they love, and I go talk with them, and I get really strong with them. I side myself with them to create that triangle with that young person, because I know that that's effective. And then I'll also go to some of the teachers who the student is avoiding, skipping class, things like that, and we find that a lot of times that relationship, there's significant conflict avoidance and anxiety, and it just makes it worse. And we don't have success there. It's like a blocked artery, a clog. We have to be moving. System has to be moving. It's alive. And when it stops moving, which is what can happen when we have severing, when we have this ripping of flesh, when we have these situations that create broken foundations, we need to repair them. We need to repair them quickly, and we need to use materials that will bounce back from the environment, that will stay strong, that we can depend on. So that's what we're modeling for our children. Okay, sorry, I got a little tangent there. Hope that answered your question. Danielle is asking, are foster parents able to receive any sort of financial help when they're fostering children? Okay, so we answered that one. Let's see. Oh, thank you guys for coming in and letting me know that you can still see me. The technology was a little bit, sometimes can be stressful. We have a question from Joyce, and we've got about 5 more minutes, so let's see if we can get through all these. If your marriage relationship is having problems with constant fighting, how do you convince the other parent to go to therapy? That's a tough one. It's a tough one. But that is the mentality. Sometimes, as we know, we can't convince someone, right? We can only control ourselves. We can only do what we need to do. And sometimes that means having to create some sort of situation where, this other partner, having these continual conversations. I would, in a quiet time with a good setting, no children around, sit together and really, in a very gentle way, a very gentle startup, just really communicate to the partner that how important you feel that it is for the two of you to go to therapy, and how the likelihood of your children, if you have children, to be successful just increases when you do this deliberately, when you take your relationship and your roles in their lives as seriously as they are. Meaning you decide on purpose, no matter what we've got between us and how I feel and so forth, we're going to do everything we can for these kids. And hopefully, both of you feel that way. But it's definitely, convincing is difficult, but it's necessary. Sometimes going alone or bringing someone else, but it can get complicated. So the best thing to do would be to somehow convince your partner, but doing it from another way. Because I guess however it's happening now might not be working, and maybe even adding to more fighting. But really, and you might be doing the heavy lifting, I don't know, it sounds like it. But if there is that constant fighting, really having to say, listen, we need this conversation, we can't do it like this. Being that boundary keeper. Unfortunately, that's often the case, difficult, because we're all human. But if we keep that goal in mind, what's best for the kids, it is to have a peaceful life and not be listening or witnessing the fighting. So good luck to you. Please find me on Kounsel app if you need. Let's see here. What advice can you give to, this is from Stephanie, can you give to a happy and durable marriage? Well, definitely don't triangulate your kids. If you have some, definitely deal with each other. If you have a problem with the other person, don't go through your kids, as much as that can be easier sometimes. Don't allow your child to take that role as a symptom bearer. And you can do that on purpose by deciding that your marriage and your relationship needs to look a certain way and thrive, breathe a certain way, and have a certain impact, have a certain effect. And if it doesn't, then there's a lot of help out there to learn how to do that. I didn't know how to be married. I did experience a lot of things growing up, with my parents and their remarriages and so forth. but it's also given me an interest. We don't know anything until we learn. So we just do what we know until we know something else. So sometimes just becoming aware that I don't know will give you a good start. We have 2 minutes, so let me just see if I can get through a couple more. Melissa, is it bad if my son is way too attached to his grandparents to a point that he'd rather spend more time with them than with me and his dad? Well, I don't know what you mean by bad. It sounds like you would like to be closer to your son, you and your husband or his dad. And it's a wonderful thing for grandparents to have a good relationship with their grandchildren, but you guys come first in terms of hierarchy. You've got the grandparents, parents, kids. So if you're feeling that there's a little bit of overstepping from this upper level here, that's something that, might need a conversation, that might need to be addressed directly. And maybe you and the dad of your kids want to talk about how you want to address that with them and what specifically you'd like to see going forward. Now, if they're not supporting you and wanting to spend more time with your son or daughter or your son, then you might need to set a boundary with them. That we're not gonna talk about it in a different way. Mom and dad are first. So I'm not sure if that's helpful to you, but I hope so. Lauren, how best can a parent-grandparent support his child and grandchildren if divorced in a long-distance relationship? That's a tough one. It's a tough one because it will take more creativity. It will take more energy. If there is a physical separation, it might take, more deliberate, several steps to get there. It won't be easy, but the intention needs to be there, and an urgency of we need to see this young person succeed. We need to see them doing better. We've got to do something as the adults, and that's, if that has to happen over a phone call or Skype or some sort of internet, then that has to happen. But it's very important to get the people who are having conflict to talk to each other, so that young person doesn't have to be in the middle. All right, and it is 7:01, so let me see if I can answer this last question from Kristen. Could you explain more about the Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Act and how it helps? Let's see here. Thank you for asking that. Yes, let me find that for you. That's a great one. So basically, while I'm looking at this, what this act does is it provides grandparents the ability to have more access to resources. It takes some of the stigma away. There's a certain culture in the foster system and the way people are treated and looked at, and so in a sense, maybe, the act is allowing grandparents to take on a rightful parenting position in the case when the parent is either incapacitated in some form to do that. So that's what it is. Let's see here. Specifically, though, I wanted to read you that, but we may be going over here. So let's see here. Feel free to email me as well. Kristen, you can email me at guzzardopaulina@gmail.com. And I can also get that to you because I'm not seeing it here, and I wanted to give you the details, but I know that it's a new act that's come in, that's been signed in to really support grandparents and their ability to make decisions when the parents are not there, and to provide them with the necessary resources. So I hope that answered some of your questions. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been really great, and I appreciate your questions and time and interest. So thanks a lot. Take care.